All right. Okay. So Hanukkah, villains and heroes. Brad just told me that in Disney they have two parking lots. One is designated for villains and one is designated for heroes, especially. So those are there's yeah the categories are such. So that sounds like fun. So obviously all of you know the story of Hanukkah. So I'm not going to go into that so much. It's really this teaching is really to make sure that we understand a little bit more of the background of Hanukkah, because there's actually so much that's going on. And I think the story of Hanukkah is often being kind of played down to the degree where people make this whimsical holiday kind of all about, you know, winter time and dreidels and menorahs and things like that. So last year I spoke and I taught about Hanukkah for 2 or 3 weeks, and I talked about beyond menorahs and dreidels. I think that was my teaching. And this is going to go a little bit along the same line, because I think we all get the stories of menorahs and we all get about the dreidels and things like that. But I want us to dive a little bit deeper into what was really going on. Why in the world did Hanukkah happen? What happened? The significance of what happened. I want us to consider those themes, those topics, because this is that time of year when we think about these things. And so if you ask an average person about Hanukkah, like we said last year, people will give you all kinds of whimsical answers, funny things. Oh, it's about this, it's the festival of light and all of that. And it's true. Some of these things are true. Let's look a little bit at the Babylonian Talmud. This is a traditional source that we have. This is a Neusner translation from Tractate Shabbat. This is 5th or 6th century of the Common Era. The Talmud is an ancient document, not quite as ancient as some, okay? So this is the rabbinic commentary. And the rabbis say, what's the point of Hanukkah? It's in a line that our rabbis have taught on the Tannaite authority. On the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah, which are 8, begin. On these days it is forbidden to lament the dead and to fast. For when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they made all of the oil that was in the sanctuary unclean. But when the rule of the Hasmonean house took hold, they conquered them. They searched but found only a single jar of oil lying with the seal of the high priest. But that jar had enough oil only for a single day. But there was a miracle done with it, and they lit the lamp with it for 8 days. The next year, they assigned these days and made them festival for the recitation of Hallel psalms and for Thanksgiving. This is to me, this is a very interesting passage, because how many times do you get to peek into the minds of people who lived so many centuries before us, and to give their answer, to give their commentary on what it is that we are celebrating, or at least on what it is they were celebrating. So to me, this text is fascinating because it answers so many interesting angles. I always wonder, like, if I asked somebody living in the ancient time, what is Hanukkah about, what answer would they give me? Because, of course, you know, they're not inundated with this culture that we're surrounded by. You know, holidays, 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 gifts, presents, you know, go buy, shop, credit cards, you know, all this stuff. They're not inundated by the materialistic side of the holidays that we have in our culture. So what kind of answers would they give me? What do they think it's all about? So to me, this is a very, very telling passage. Let's just go through it just a little bit. So what's the point of Hanukkah? It says it's what our rabbis taught on Tannaite authority. So Tannaim are the early rabbis, the rabbis who put together Mishnah, okay? They're the original preservers of the tradition. So this is later rabbis basing their answer on the authority of the very early rabbis, 1st and 2nd century rabbis. So it says that on the 25th of Kislev is Hanukkah, which is 8 days. On these days, it is forbidden to lament the dead and to fast. Now, isn't that interesting that their story about Hanukkah, their first comment, besides the fact that it's 8 days, you're not supposed to fast and you're not supposed to lament. Do you find that interesting at all? Now, why would they say that? What do you think? What's their reasoning? Why did they put that up front when they think about Hanukkah? You're not supposed to lament, you're not supposed to. So be happy, yeah, that's good. So it's a happy holiday.
So
Go ahead.
Celebrate God's deliverance from the bad guys.
Right, so that would make sense.
Also not celebrating war, because war, I mean, that is not something that is celebrated by rabbis.
Right.
So therefore it's a celebration rather than the lamenting.
Right, so listen, what they're saying is that we have enough lamenting in our lives. If you know Jewish history, if you study Jewish history, most of the Jewish history is more about crying than laughing, okay? It's a lot of sorrow, it's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. So they're saying on this day, we break out of the normal and we're happy. Why? Because of something really special. So I want you to just to realize that, you know, many of us are very positive, upbeat people. We're happy about life. We're happy to be alive. But this was not the world that the rabbis lived in the 5th and 6th century CE. Remember, Israel is in shambles. Most communities are scattered over the world. Jerusalem is just in ruins. Everything that was good and holy and pure and wonderful has been trampled down. And so the story of Hanukkah is a remembrance of those days of glory when God actually intervened and did mighty miracles to save the temple. Now, that's not their reality. That's not their life. That's not what they're experiencing right now. They're living out there scattered in all these different countries, wanting to be worshiping the temple, but not able. And so, in a sense, they identify with the story of Maccabees, and that makes them, you know, rejoice that God does those types of miracles, and maybe he will do this for us. So that's why you're not supposed to lament, you're not supposed to mourn, you're not supposed to fast. So these are the same rules, by the way, we have with Shabbat. You know, it's the same idea. We're not supposed to turn Shabbat into this down, so to say, moment. It's supposed to be a celebration of something good and holy and pure and wonderful. So we channel our prayers in a different direction. So it says that these are the days that we remember how Greeks entered the sanctuary. They made all the oil that was sanctuary unclean. Look at that. I know a lot of people don't think about things like oil being unclean, right? But it was unclean. It was unclean for use in the temple. It was defiled. It was mishandled, let's put it that way. Now, if some of the stories that I read to you from historical sources that we know, maybe we'll have some time, I'll get into them with you, some of the stuff that people actually did to desecrate the temple, the way they describe it, it's, you know, pretty unclean, let's put it that way. But, so it says that oil was unclean, but when the Hasmoneans took hold, they conquered them, they searched out, they found one single jar of oil. So here's the story of Hanukkah. Last year we talked about it, that the earliest story about the miracle of oil actually appears in a document that's 5th and 6th century. This is the earliest documented, sort of say, story that we have about the miracle of oils. Because if you read the book of Maccabees, you read other stories about Hanukkah, they won't mention the miracle of oil. But this is the first mention we get. And then after that, everybody starts, sort of say, mentioning that this happened. So apparently it did happen. It just didn't get recorded in history, let's put it that way. So they had a single jar of oil, which was sealed with the seal of high priest, so they knew that was clean. It was priest certified, right? So they had the special seal on it. And they decided to light the menorah. And it was enough oil just to last a single day, but it says there was a miracle done with it. And they lit the lamp, and it was for 8 days. And says then, as this occurred, they took this as a sign. To them, this was not just an event that happened. They recognized this as a miracle, and they said that they assigned these days, the days of Hanukkah, and made them a festival, a celebration. And what did they make the celebration for? To do what? Interestingly enough, they were going to recite the Hallel, the Psalms. So the holiday was not about dreidels or menorahs or gifts or any of that stuff that we often think about when we think about Hanukkah. The holiday was to rejoice and to recite the Hallel, to recite the Psalms. Now these are the Psalms that are recited traditionally at the moment when the sacrifices are brought in the temple. Okay, this is part of the temple service. This is why it was important. They did this for Thanksgiving. Why? Because God gave them the chance to worship once again. A lot of times I get to talk to people and try to explain, sort of say, the liturgical services. Some new people always come into the synagogue and they try to join our worship. Sometimes it's hard. It's Hebrew, all these different prayers, all these things that we say. Sometimes we repeat them multiple times. It's hard for people to understand why we do things what we do, how and what's the point of it all. And the point of it is that we're connecting to something very, very ancient. And this is what they were doing. thousands of years ago, and that was the way they knew how to worship God, and that way is an ancient way. If there's any way that we could be certain about how God wanted to be worshipped, it is through sacrifices in the temple, because he actually flat out commands it. All the other things of worship that we do, well, those are kind of our little inventions and innovations that we add to it. But what Hashem really wanted was that. And he commanded it, and he directed about it, and he explained to us and taught us and said, teach the priests, and the priests will pass it on and on and on forever in perpetuity. Of course, unless the temple is destroyed, and we can't do that. So when they finally had a chance to reignite that worship, what did they do? They went right back to it, and they decided that this is the moment when they're going to read the Hallel Psalms. Once again, bring the sacrifices, light the menorah. This was a peak. This was a highlight for them. And this is how the rabbis describe Hanukkah in their day, 5th, 6th century of the Common Era. So you could see the slightly different perspective. Some things we're totally on the same page with them, some not. Anybody, any questions? So, all clear? Good? It's a good modern translation. So, all right. So, what is the message of the Festival of Lights? What's the point of Hanukkah? Reflect on some of these ideas that we talked about. Usually, when people talk about Hanukkah, there's kind of two aspects that they highlight. What are some of those things? You guys know these. Miracle of oil, miracle of light, okay. And there's another miracle.
Victory.
Dedication. Victory. Excellent. Fantastic. That's exactly it. So miracle of menorah oil. So yay, we get to eat the fried food now. Okay. I mean, that's what we do, right? Like, hey, we get to eat fried food. Look, we made up a great tradition to commemorate something nice, amazing that happened. So we eat fried food, okay? Fine. Once a year, we can allow that. Great. Miracle of victory against the Hellenism? Well, yay, we get to play dreidels and learn 4 Hebrew letters.
Yay.
Yay, we get to learn 4 Hebrew letters. It's amazing, right? Victory. You understand, I'm laughing at this because 4 Hebrew letters is not exactly enough to keep you grounded in Hashem. It's a start. It's a good start. But if that's all you've got...
That tells the story of how the language stayed alive.
Yeah, so the rabbis were genius in encoding even the dreidel with a spiritual message. If you don't know this or not, everything in Judaism is spiritual. Anything you touch, anything you walk, the reason why we stand up is because it has a spiritual reason why we stand up during certain prayers. The reason why we don't stand up has a spiritual reason. The way we spill the dreidel and the reason why those letters are on dreidel actually have a spiritual reason because they have a spiritual lesson to teach us. And these traditions have come about in a very, intentional way, okay? So, just for fun, who knows what the letters of the dreidel actually say? What do they mean? They're not just random letters from the Hebrew alphabet. They're not Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, right? Nes, Gadol, Chaya, Sham. Okay, Sham or Po? Look, I get really good answers. So what's the difference? Nes Gadol Chaya Sham, Nes Gadol Chaya Po means a great miracle happened here, Po, and Sham there. So guess what? An Israeli dreidel looks different from the dreidel outside of the land of Israel. Okay? So outside of the land of Israel, we have Shin. Inside, it's replaced with a Pei because the great miracle happened here, not there. So even funny things like that. Every once in a while I see a picture with a dreidel and I see a Pei and I'm like, oh, that's an Israeli dreidel. So a lot of people, if you really want to have fun with somebody, okay, who has been playing dreidel games for a long time, switch out the dreidel on them. Just get an Israeli dreidel, give us this, we're playing with this one today, and it ends, and they're like, I don't know what to do with that letter. So if you know how to play dreidel, you know the rules, but all of a sudden, you can really mess them up. So, miracle of menorah, miracle of victory against Hellenism, those are the 2 main themes that people highlight, and that is really a good big picture. But what I want you to realize, there's so much more in the story of Hanukkah. It's not just about victory. It's not just about oil. It's a big story. It really is a epic story that includes Jews who are really small, tiny people, okay? It includes Jews. But we are a part of a much, much bigger story of what was going on in the world. And actually, what happened is really kind of not our fault. We just kind of got caught in the middle of it. Let's put it that way. So what is Hanukkah story really about? Well, it's a tale of Jewish struggle against Greek culture, Hellenism, and against one another. I don't know if you realize this or not. A lot of the Hanukkah story is about Jews fighting other Jews. Fight for control of priesthood. That's how we got into that pickle, by the way. And Jerusalem temple. Because if you control priesthood and you control Jerusalem temple, you pretty much control Israel. That's how it was in those days. So it's the ancient battle of progressives versus traditionalists. Those who want to be Greek and those who don't want to be Greek, who want to be the same backwards bearded Jews that they have been for ages. No? All right, so progressives, traditionalists, in some ways these things don't ever change. Survival, to live and fight another day, that's really what Hanukkah is about. It's a big, epic story. And the battles of Hanukkah and all the background and all the history, once you start studying, you realize how much, this story has for us. Spiritually wise, we can carry so many lessons out of it. So I promised to talk about heroes and villains of Hanukkah. Who are the heroes and who are the villains in the Hanukkah story? Can you name any names for me?
Judas Maccabee.
Judas Maccabee. Okay, so Judas definitely is a hero. Okay.
Antiochus Epiphanes, bad guy.
Antiochus Epiphanes is the bad guy. Okay, the villain. Are those the only ones? Get more? So far I got, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader or something like that. I got only the two big guys right there. Any other guys over there? Okay. Maccabees themselves. Yeah, all of the Maccabees are heroes, right? They're all heroes. So all of them, all the brothers, and of course Mattathias, the father, and all of them are heroes. So that whole family. And of course they single-handedly, just a handful of them fought everything off. No, they had a whole entire army. There's a lot more heroes out there. So I got some ideas for you. So villains. We have Menelaus. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the high priest who wanted the priesthood for himself and decided to bribe the king to get it. And of course, we have Antiochus, who gave into that bribe very happily. We have all the Hellenists. We have all the different priests like like Menelaus and his family and all these other people. We have the entire groups of Jews who want to go the Greek way. We read about it. So then we have the heroes. Of course, we have Mattathias. We have all of the Maccabees, the whole entire family, and all of the resistant fighters are there. All of the people who took up weapons and decided to fight. They're all heroes in a sense. And there's more on that list. In fact, there's a lot more villains, a lot more heroes that we can go into. And so what I'm hoping is that in the next few lessons, however many we decide to do, we'll highlight some of them. Today we'll begin with villains now. So I want to highlight one important aspect, that as often we focus on the villains and heroes in the stories, and that's a very kind of a cultural way for us to do so because we've been fed this way of thinking. There's nothing wrong with thinking that way. I want you to realize that the remnant of Israel who resolved to fight for the ways of the covenant were aided by God, whose lights is always at the center of the story. God is really the only hero of the Hanukkah story. If you really want the down truth, it's really all about him. We're just playing the game. We're part of it. We're part of the story. But it's really about God and his light. It's about his covenant. It's about his promises that he made to Israel. It's about them lasting and not going away. And those who are fighting for one way of life or another way of life are just part of this drama, essentially. But God and his light, his covenant, his commandments, that's what's in the center. The survival of Israel, essentially. That's what we're talking about. Not just mere survival, but actually flourishing, so that we could be a holy remnant, a people called after his name, as it was designed. So, that's the big secret in the heroes and villains story. Yes, it's true. So let's start reading a little bit. This is Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, first century Jewish writer, actually from a priestly family himself. And so he's one of the very few historians that leaves us a very detailed account of what happened in those days. So the reason why is because he's a Jew. And a lot of historians that we have from that era are non-Jews, and they don't really care about those little tiny people out there in the middle of Judea. It's like, who writes the history of Lower Alabama, you know. Only people who care, who live there, right? The rest of the world, you know, who could write? Exactly, thank you. I don't know. So this is the same thing. I want you to realize that in the grand scheme of things, Jews are nobodies. And so Josephus happens to be an educated Jew in the court of an emperor's court in the Flavian dynasty, and he writes these things for them, but in the doing so, he actually preserves an amazing amount of Jewish history. So he says, now Judas, that's Judas Maccabee, celebrated the festival of the restoration of the sacrifices of the temple for 8 days, and omitted no sort of pleasures thereon, but he feasted them upon very rich and splendid sacrifices, and he honored God and delighted them by hymns and psalms. I'm going to stop right there. Of course, besides the beautiful English style of the Old English, this is a Winston's translation. It's the 1800s translation, so it's a little bit archaic. I try to polish it off sometimes and take out some of the archaic stuff out of it, but for the most part, if it sounds like that, that's what it is. So it says that Judas celebrated the festival of restoration of the sacrifices. Did you notice? This is now a 1st century Jew who writes for other people, but it's still, this is his reflection of what Hanukkah really is. So if you want to know an opinion of how a 1st century Jew would answer what Hanukkah is, this is it right here, at least or a version of it. So this is the festival of the restoration of sacrifices. It's not really about lights or gifts or presents or even about the menorah miracle. It really is about the fact that we got sacrifices back. We lost it, now we got it back. That's what they're really celebrating, the temple. It says that, of course, they celebrated and they also sang hymns and psalms. Does that sound familiar? Didn't we just read in the Talmud that that's exactly how they celebrated Hanukkah? By singing hymns and psalms. Well, in the Talmud, they actually tell you which ones. They told you, the Hallel. They tell you which ones. They go to page such and such, you know. They tell you. But here, it's a little bit more obscure. Why? Because he's writing to the Romans. It's not going to turn on to the right page. So, they were so very glad at the festival of their customs when, after a long time of intermission, they unexpectedly had regained the freedom of their worship. And they made it a law for their posterity that they should keep a festival on account of the restoration of their temple worship for 8 days. So just a nice straight up narrative about what happened. And it was unexpected. You know, when you read the books of Maccabees, it actually tells you they weren't really expecting to take Jerusalem. It's like when they took Jerusalem, they're like, okay, what do we do now? Didn't think that was going to happen that fast and that easy, but God gave them favor. They retook it. And so they said, what do we do next? We didn't plan for this to be over that fast. So it says, and from that time to this, we celebrate this festival and call it lights. So Josephus tells us that they call it lights, phota in Greek, from which we get words like photography, photosynthesis, everything, you know. Yeah, that's what they called it, lights, lights. So it's okay that we call Hanukkah festival lights, because it is. That's what they called it back then in the 1st century already. He says, he doesn't know exactly why, so he says, I suppose the reason was because of this liberty beyond our hopes that appeared to us, and that thence was the name given to that festival. So he says, we were happy, and that's what we called it. It's kind of a, I don't know, kind of not an explanation of an explanation, right? Not a deep one, but that's Josephus. So he explained it as far as he's concerned. So what do you see some of the interesting things in here? This is what I've highlighted for you, that I think that's a very different perspective, kind of like a 1st century take on what is going on. To me, what jumps out is the fact that this is about sacrifices, it's about revival of the customs, and it's celebrated with psalms and hymns, and it somehow is connected to lights. Although he doesn't tell us about the menorah miracle, it is connected to lights. So that's 1st century account. Now, what is the message of this festival of lights? Once again, Jewish people are always plagued by villains. They come from Greece or Egypt or Syria or even Jerusalem itself. It doesn't really matter. The villains bring terrible harm and suffering, yet they are considered villains because, not just because they bring suffering, but because they seek to put out Hashem's light forever. That's really what makes them true villains. Because there's bad guys and then there's villains, okay? There are guys who make wrong judgments, bad decisions, and really sort of say, take you in the wrong direction. And then there's people who are just wicked and evil all day long. Exactly. It's a different story. So that's what makes villains villains. So here's the first one for you. You know this one. Antiochus Epiphanes. He was born in the year 215 BCE, and he became king of the Seleucid Empire in the year 175. So he was an extravagant ruler, known for very unpredictable and erratic behavior, by the way. His coins stated that he was deity manifest. How about that?
Deity manifest.
Yes, he actually thought this of himself. Now, I want you to realize he was not the first one. Some of his ancestors, actually, the kings of Seleucid Empire that came before him, they had no trouble of claiming deity as well. So he was known as Antiochus Ho Epiphanes, which translates as Antiochus God Manifest.
God manifest.
That's what he was calling himself. Now, though secretly he was mocked as Antiochus Ho Epimanes, which translates as Antiochus the madman.
The madman.
I mean, you change one letter. So look at this, like this. You see this mu right here, and then you change phi and mu, and all of a sudden it turns into a madman.
Madman.
I'm willing to bet a Jew came up with that one, but you know, maybe a really educated, Greek-speaking Jew. So I don't know, just my theory. So that's Antiochus. Now we realize that he's a villain because of what he has done and the role that he plays in the Hanukkah, but there's so much to his character that people don't always know about, and little tiny facts of his life I find absolutely fascinating. Here's an interesting account. This is from a historian, a Roman historian. He writes in the History of Rome. His name is Granius Licinianus. And so in this book, he tells us a little bit about what Antiochus was really like. Antiochus, who was staying in Athens, became king after the death of his brother. If you know, the story really was that he wasn't supposed to become the king. His brother was supposed to become king, but he got it passed on to him. So afterwards, he considered waging war against the Romans. Yes, Antiochus was a little bit impulsive. He almost got into war with Rome. Hey, he's got a pretty sizable kingdom, but taking on Rome is serious business. Over, you know what? Over what? Over an island. I think they fought over Cyprus. Yeah, so he wanted it, and they wanted it too. So, but he backed down. So, but he's said to have been deterred by the death of Perseus. So, that's his friend. Antiochus had a few good traits mixed in with many bad ones. This is pretty bad when a historian says that about you. He had an unpredictable nature and was extremely frivolous. He used to join in revels at banquets, basically like crazy orgies, and he danced naked to the music. Let's see, he bathed in public, which for royalty was kind of no. You don't bathe in public. Like, you can afford your own bathroom. Why would you go to a public one? So he bathed in public and went to the bath anointed with myrrh and drenched with perfumes, meaning he ruined it for everybody. You don't put perfumes and oil on yourself till after you take a bath. But he did it before. He took a bath in perfume, then he decided to go to the bathhouse and impress everybody how good smelling he was, I guess. You know, eventually, but it's oil. So, you get the idea. Antiochus is a real party animal, let's put it that way. Very unpredictable, very impulsive. The story goes on. He led a procession on Austrian pony, and at Hierapolis, he pretended to marry Diana. Diana is Greek goddess of fertility. Diana is a Roman, her Roman name, and so her Greek name you would know as Aphrodite. So he pretended to marry Aphrodite. And while the others prepared a banquet, because, you know, he's a royal, people are going to play along. If he wants to marry a goddess, they have to play along. And while others prepared a banquet, he removed the vessels from the temple, and after dining off the tables, he took away the vessels as a dowry. except for one ring, which was the only thing he left of all the offerings to the goddess. So he basically cleaned out the temple of goddess Diana, ate all the food, and took all the offerings with him, leaving her a ring because, well, of course, they were married. Yes, he does. You're seeing a pattern now here. Now you have to understand, the reason why I'm telling you the story, because this will help you understand why he did what he did in Jerusalem. So, when Gracchus, whom I mentioned previously, was the consul of the second time, Antiochus died of terror one night. So kind of a mysterious death. We don't really know why, but so the historian tells us that he just basically had a bad dream and died. While his body was being carried back to Antioch, the animal suddenly took fright, and his body was tossed into the river and disappeared. It was the penalty that he paid for his fragrant sacrilege. Antiochus dedicated 2 colossal statues, 12 cubits high, one to Olympian Jupiter and other to Capitoline Jupiter. At Athens, he built the Olympion, which with marble walls, and he surrounded it with numerous columns. The famous temple of the Olympian Jupiter at Athens had long remained unfinished. So he died before he could finish building some temples. Yeah.
Fair to assume that when they say things like that, like he died of terror one night and then the animals were frightened and they lost the body, that he was killed and they got rid of him.
Perhaps. Most emperors and kings and rulers did not go peacefully in the middle of the night. So he might have been poisoned, which is why he died in his sleep. Or something like he went to sleep and never woke up. We really don't know a lot of times what happened. People suspect a lot of times with royal families that this type of foul play is happening because people want to be the king. That somebody needs to dispose of him before they can take over. And so, but he had plenty of enemies. But the story is interesting that they say, well, the reason why this happened to him because of his sacrilege, meaning like he plunders temples of Diana and things like that. So he's just not a great guy, even according to the Greek and Roman way of understanding propriety. He's not exactly an upstanding guy. So this is from a Roman historian. As you could see, they're not being very kind to Antiochus. So if we kind of place him in the category of villains, it explains why. And you see, he already has a nasty habit of robbing temples. So this is not new. He's done this. He's done this in different places. And he also builds. He likes to build things, a lot of times to himself and to his god. So Jupiter that he worshipped, that's like his patron deity is Jupiter. And so specifically Jupiter Capitolinus is like his family god, basically. He wanted to build statues to him everywhere to increase the honor to his family god. Yes. Yes, that's another name for Zeus. Yes. So that's the kind of guy that he is, and that's why we consider him definitely a villain. So, a couple more things that you need to understand about Antiochus. Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes, victoriously finished the series of 6 Syrian wars between his ancestors, the Seleucids, and the Ptolemies in Egypt. This is where the Hanukkah story really comes in. What you don't realize is we got trapped in the middle of a war. That wasn't even ours. The wars were over the territory of Syria. So there's one little piece of land that they both wanted, and they fought for it. And it began by Antiochus I, 75 years before Antiochus IV was even born. So this is an old war. There's a whole series of wars that they're fighting. And Antiochus IV gets to finish it. There's a decisive victory, basically. The only way to win in a war is to wipe out the other guy completely, or somehow make them not able to fight back again. And that's exactly what he has achieved. So what happens is Judea and Jerusalem are basically caught in between this struggle in the year 168 BCE. That's what we call the Maccabee Wars. So that's when it happened. But the wars of the Maccabees are really squabbles for Antiochus. They're little small regional conflicts of a much bigger war that him and his family has been fighting for a long time. Now I want you to realize how embarrassed this guy might have been because when Maccabees won, this guy has been fighting wars his entire life. His entire family has been built on wars. He comes from a hereditary family of famous generals, great generals.
Both sides descended from Alexander, or not descended from him, but they divided his territories
Right.
up. Yeah.
So these people are well-known commanders, military. I mean, it's like they all went to West Point and graduated with honors, and some Jews with sickles and hammers, beat them up or something like that. It's like priests who don't really know much about war. So it's embarrassing for sure, which is why he reacted the way he did. By the way, you have to understand, you don't embarrass people like that. So this is the story. This is where Hanukkah comes in. These Syrian wars that have been fought for generations now, they get caught in the middle. Why? Because if you know where Egypt is, and you understand the territory that he rules, which would have been Asia Minor and Persia, is what he had. Well, to get to Egypt, you have to go to Israel. You have to pass through. And so we just happened to be on the way. And every time the armies went one direction or the other direction, they had to pass through Israel. And that's how this whole battle got started. That's how Jerusalem, that's how Jews got basically entangled with these guys. Because prior to that, things were fairly peaceful for the most part. Israel was left alone. So here's another story from Josephus. This is, again, Antiquities, another chapter. It says, and it came to pass after 2 years, in the 105th year of the 25th day of the month, which was called Kislev. This is, of course, Josephus writing, so he tells you what the Jewish month is. And by the Macedonians, Apileus, the 153rd Olympiad. So he gives them good references to their time counting. It says that the king came up to Jerusalem. So the king that he talks about is Antiochus IV. Okay, this is what now we're getting to the Hanukkah story. And pretending peace, he got possession of the city by treachery. So he didn't come as a conqueror. He just came as a friend. But he's marching with his entire military. He's on a military campaign. He just says, don't worry, I'm not here to conquer you. This is, all these weapons are reserved for the other guys. Don't worry. So he comes and he takes possession of the city by treachery. At which time, he spared not so much as those that admitted him into it. So basically the people that opened the door and welcomed him in are the ones he killed first. On the account of the riches that lay in the temple, but led by his covetous inclination. And this is, of course, Josephus' estate, but you get the idea. This is actually historically accurate because we already know this about Antiochus from other sources. It says, for he saw there was in it, in the temple, a great deal of gold and many ornaments that had been dedicated to it of very great value. And in order to plunder its wealth, he ventured to break the league he had made. What I want you to realize is the reason why he entered the city as in its non-threatening way. People welcomed him. They opened the gates. Is because they weren't expecting him to attack. They weren't expecting him to rob the temple. He was coming as a king who rules this domain. This is essentially his land, and these are his vassals, his servants. Israel at that point is under his jurisdiction. They pay him taxes, they pay him tributes all the time, and they have an agreement. We don't fight in wars against you. You don't destroy us, and we just keep paying taxes, and you just be rich and happy and healthy and do whatever you want to do. So they had an arrangement that when he sees the riches of the temple, he decides to break. So they had a good arrangement. He had tax revenue coming in. It's like he had this income flowing to him all the time. He decided to break that because he saw the riches of the temple. So here's that, personality who likes to rob temples. There you go. That's what happened. He saw they had too much gold, too many ornaments, too many fancy shiny things that he needed to have. Now, why did he need all that? Well, you have to realize how big his empire was, and you need to finance it. And wars are very, very expensive. So in order to fight wars, you have to hire soldiers. You have to pay them. You have to feed them. You have to do all these different things. And sometimes even You have to pay their retirement plans and things like that. This is a very expensive enterprise. So Josephus tells us what happened. He came to Jerusalem as a friend, and by treachery took the city and slaughtered the people and took all the gold and took all the good things out of the temple, because he was actually intending to plunder its wealth all along. It was just an easy way to get in. An easy way to get in. Make sense? Is that the story you heard? So anyway, this is the story Josephus tells us. Again, this is he's writing like in, I guess, around the year 80 or so. These stories before the turn of the century. So this is another part of the story that you have to understand. I say we four kings, so it's kind of I'm playing a little bit with you. So we four kings of Orient are, right? So we have four kings here. In the year 323 BCE, Alexander the Great, whom you may have heard about, because he is the great, how can you not know about him? He died. He died in Babylon. He died actually, ironically, in King Nebuchadnezzar's palace. It's like symbolic. I mean, he really was an amazing guy in the sense that he achieved all this grandeur, and then he died. So he fell ill and died at the age of 33. 33, can you believe that? Now, he conquered the whole known world before that. So, guy's very accomplished. It says that his son was born after his death. We know that he did have a son. And the historian Diodorus Siculus tells us, he's a first century historian, that though he had a son, his son was, he wasn't even born when he died. So there's no way he can take over. And it's too long of a wait for him to grow up so he can become an heir and take over his kingdom. It says that when he was dying on his deathbed, Alexander left his empire to the strongest. They asked him, who do you want to rule in your stead? And he uttered his famous words, the strongest. That's where it goes to the strongest. So whoever it is. So that's how we know the story. So as a result, some people, of course, his family tried to keep it going. The relatives tried to rule in his stead. Let's wait for the boy to grow up. Didn't work. The ambitions took hold. And what happened is, of course, the friends of Alexander, his generals, who fought alongside of him in all these wars conquering the world, now became rivals, and they fought for the control of his vast empire. So we have several generals. You have Ptolemy, who essentially takes over Egypt, and that becomes his territory. We have Antigonus, who basically rules Thrace. Thrace is kind of like southern Europe. It's Turkey, essentially. It's portions of Turkey and little portions of Greece and things like that, but it's that southern Europe area, so not a huge kingdom. Then we have Cassander, who took over Greece, and Seleucus. That's the important one for us. So Asia Minor and Persia. These four generals became kings in their own little pieces of Alexander's empire that they have carved out for themselves with their armies and their support, and they became known as the Diadochi. So they are the four rulers of this great empire, that they sliced it up and diced it up into pieces. So this is where, again, Israel comes in, because now you know these generals, these people who have dedicated their entire lives to war, are not going to stop fighting. So you have now Ptolemy in Egypt and Seleucus in Asia Minor, in Persia, and they're going to fight over territories. And yeah, they do. They fight over Syria, essentially, which Israel is kind of like right there, right next to it. And in the end, Israel gets dragged into that fight. Once again, because of the proximity. And all these big guys are basically fighting their wars, just controlling territories. That's what they want. So that's a little bit of a history for you. Here's something to kind of throw a map on for you so you can understand where things go. So here's the Egyptian kingdom right here. So Alexander did conquer that. And you could see this is Asia Minor and Persia. So that's a big part. So that's the Seleucid kingdom. And this is the Ptolemy kingdom. So Antigonus right here, and so Cassander right here. And what I want you to see is this little piece of land right here. Look at that. That's the important part for us, right? That's what we really care about. This little piece of land right here. You could see it's all blue, encircled, with the yellow in the middle. So Judea, essentially, Judea and Samaria belong to the Seleucids. But a big land around it belonged to the Ptolemies. So do you not think these guys are going to try to annex each other's little piece of the pie? Eventually they would. Of course, the moment they build up their strength, they'll figure out some way to finagle that piece of land, because it's all about income and revenue and taxes and things like that. So nothing new. But look at this land. This is massive. This is massive. And as a tiny little Israel is just caught in between, literally. So, of course, Alexander. I don't know if Alexander the Great should be a villain or a hero. I honestly don't know. Some people would say he's a hero. Lots of Jewish boys were named Alexander after how he treated Jews in Jerusalem when he conquered his empire. So some would consider him a good guy. Other people, not so much. Why? Because of what he's brought to the world. In the end, his conquering conquests ended, and then he had destruction and more war and more plunder. So Alexander was born in 536 BCE. 356, I'm sorry. So Alexander is born in 356 BCE. He's born in Macedonia. He's Macedonian. He's not really Greek. Well, he's Greek, but Macedonia is a very particular part of Greece. So he becomes king of Macedonia at the age of 20. His father dies, he becomes king. And then he conquers and unites Greek cities and states. So his first conquest really was to conquer his own people. He really wanted to unite all the Greeks under his banner. So as a Macedonian, he takes over all of the Greek provinces and cities and towns and brings them under his control. Now, it's a good thing and a bad thing, because now he consolidates his power. And in the year 334, he begins his campaign to conquer the Persian Empire. Now, I have no idea why he decided that that was necessary, but he felt that that's what needed to be done. And so he gets to conquer the Persian Empire, which at that point includes Judea. The Jews are part of the big Persian conglomerates, because at that moment, those were the latest conquerors that came and got us. So now, yeah, so that's what he gets. So he decides to go after them, and that means going after Judea as well. So Darius III was the king that controlled, at that point, what is known as Judea, or what we know as Israel back then.
I have a question.
Bring it on.
Alexander the Great is a Macedonian, and from what I understand, that a place, city, person with the name or Don in it, in this case Macedonia, that Don represents the tribe of Dan. Anyone ever hear that before?
I heard all kinds of interesting theories.
And
most of them just remain to be theories, yes.
There is a story that goes that Alexander the Great, when he was younger, that he had to prove his lineage or something like that, and had to prove that he was from the tribe of Dan or something like that. But when I hear Macedonia or Danites or anything that has Dan in it or Don in it, that is a connection to the tribe of Dan.
Don Corleone, yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of fascination with trying to find the tribes, and I appreciate it. So people want to find the tribes that were lost, and obviously Dan was lost. Well, it wasn't lost. They actually walked away. So it wasn't like, oops, we lost Dan. They walked off. They walked away from Hashem. They walked in a completely different direction. They wanted nothing to do with their brothers, and they separated as a people and dissolved into multiplicity of people. So, will I say that Macedonians are somehow connected to Dan? Who knows? And who knows however many hundreds of other peoples are now connected to Dan, because the Danites have dispersed into them. As a people, they disappeared because they've allowed to be disseminated, and their unique identity as a tribe of Dan, as the son of Jacob, is no longer. Right. So that's what it means. So if they have some sort of a distant genetic connection, I don't think it would have been preserved etymologically in the words like Macedonian or something like that. And that's just my thinking, but I don't know. Again, there are people who study this stuff a lot more than I do.
The Danube River has also a connection to the tribe of Dan.
Yeah, so there's
People in that area.
people keep searching for the tribe of Dan, but I say they're everywhere. So
They're
they
everywhere.
they have dispersed into the nations. They are no more essentially as a people. So sad to say, interestingly, the Book of Revelation does not mention them at all. But all the other tribes are mentioned.
Is that a horn on the horse?
Like where right here?
Yeah, what is that?
A mosaic from one of the famous battles. It's a depiction of one of the famous battles as he's fighting the Persians. So I forgot which the name of the battle that he fought. But this is a very famous mosaic. It's in one of the museums, and it depicts Alexander, at least what he looked like, what people imagine him looked like. We know what he looked like. The best that we know is from like coinage and statues and things like that. But we know even those things were quite embellished and stuff like that. So we don't really know what he looks like, but that's kind of sort of maybe what he looked like. So, not sure if Alexander is a villain or a hero. It depends. I'll leave that judgment up to you. But this is his empire. And this is really what precedes all these events of Hanukkah and all that stuff. So here's Macedon right here. And you can see how he goes through and he conquers all these lands and he keeps moving down. And then he comes down here, south, and tracks through Egypt, takes that over, comes back and keeps on going into Babylon. And then he keeps going south and all the way into the territory of what we call Pakistan today, and Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of these countries that we know, like he conquered them all. Pakistan came up right next to India, basically almost all the way up to India. This is a massive empire. Nobody has had an empire that large. I mean, Babylonians, sorry, move over. Alexander really, really outdid them. Persians, yeah, they all had great conquests, but nobody took that much land. So he was able to do that. Definitely a brilliant commander, if anything. But that just tells you how huge his kingdom has become. And he did all that by the age of 33. Wow, very, very accomplished. Very, very accomplished. So serious stuff. Well, something positive or maybe negative what Alexander brought to the world, I want you to realize. Alexander brought to the world Greek culture, Hellenism, okay? So Alexander's teacher is something you understand. Sometimes who your teacher is influences a lot. And who was Alexander's teacher? His teacher was Aristotle, whose teacher was Plato. And he taught Alexander, well, he had a number of other tutors, but the most famous one we know is Aristotle. So Aristotle has authored a tremendous amount of writings. I mean, just absolutely unbelievable mind.
Who's Plato's teacher? Is it
Socrates?
Sonnen?
I don't remember.
Okay. I was just researching.
Look it up.
I just learned that Plato.
Just learned it. Look it up.
Plato was the first person to ever record the story of
Right.
Atlantis.
So Plato has formulated quite a few philosophical concepts and ideas, and he actually established a lot of what we know in the modern culture, like formal learning, university systems, lyceum, gymnasium, all these different things that we know today about. They come from these guys. And Aristotle took that and developed it further. What I want you to realize, I'm just going to list these because I find this list very, very impressive. These are the types of things that Aristotle wrote about, and he was one of the first people to cohesively and deeply explore ideas like physics, biology, zoology, metaphysics, logic, ethics, aesthetics, poetry, theater, music, rhetoric, psychology, linguistics, economics, politics, meteorology, geology, and government. These are all the things that he wrote about. And in some of these areas, he was like the pioneer. There was nobody else that wrote about those types of things. So if you go today to a university campus, a whole bunch of these things are all majors today.
Exactly.
People still study this. Do you realize what happened? 300 year BCE, most of these things were established, and our world is still turning on the spokes of these guys who brought this. And why? Alexander. See, Aristotle might have said all these things and thought all those things and wrote all those things, but it's Alexander who made the world Greek. And that gave them access to all this information that the Greeks had. Greeks were working on it. They were very progressive. They were developing all these new ideas. Science was just budding, right? And then that's how the world becomes Greek, because they all speak Greek, because they all got conquered by a Macedonian. Yes?
It's interesting because I just got through teaching with the Aristotle. He came up with the theory of, atoms, of matter, and what it was made of. But Democritus actually had a better theory, but nobody believed Democritus because Aristotle.
Because Aristotle was an important guy.
He was the aristocrat of the day, and they just took his word for it. His really means nothing, but Democritus we were able to build on.
So I want you to realize how much of our modern society is still influenced by these things. Now think how many years have passed. This is what has happened. This is what we call Hellenism. This is what we call Hellenistic culture. This is Hellenistic science. This is Hellenistic philosophy, Hellenistic learning. Their thought, their ideas basically took over the world. And Israel is caught in the middle of it. Do you think we're not going to get affected by all that? Do you think we're not going to be impressed, by the way? Which is why in Jerusalem, some priests said, let's go the Greek way. Look at these guys. They're amazing. Why are we so backwards, and why are we not progressing like they do? So that's the story. That's really where Hanukkah comes in, up against this idea of the whole entire world becoming Greek and very progressive. With all the science and all the learning, you could see how that could be very intimidating and alluring in a way. And the problem is that your society tells you, no, you have to look this way, you have to dress that way. No, don't eat that, that's not kosher. Be separate. Don't hang out with these guys. Don't intermarry. Don't do this. Don't do that. All of a sudden, your world is telling you something else, and you're saying, but what I want to participate in all of that. Everybody's having a Christmas party, and I want to be invited. I don't want to sit at home and spin my dreidel alone. So I'm playing with you now, but you get the idea. So this is where the story of Hellenism comes in. And so whether you think Alexander is a good guy or a bad guy, I don't know, but definitely is a great guy. So I ran out of time, but next week we will explore his relationship with the Jews. Alexander and the Jews. How about that? Okay? That's what we'll jump into. All right. Thank you.